The blood-red sun hung low over the jagged peaks surrounding Cowboy, Colorado, as Katherine Daniels stood frozen at the edge of her family's property, watching the sheriff's carriage disappear down the dusty trail. The devastating news he'd delivered echoed in her mind like a gunshot. Her parents' stagecoach had plunged off Imogen Pass during yesterday's thunderstorm, killing them instantly. At 22, Katherine was suddenly the sole provider for her 4 younger siblings, with winter approaching and their small ranch barely surviving. "Katie, is Pa coming home today?" 6-year-old Mary's voice called from the porch, innocent and hopeful, unaware that their world had just shattered. Katherine wiped away her tears, squaring her shoulders as she turned back toward the small cabin that had always been filled with her mother's laughter and father's stories. Now it would be filled with her siblings' grief, and somehow, she would need to be strong enough for all of them. "No, sweetheart," she said, walking back to where Mary stood with 10-year-old Samuel and the twins, Emma and Eliza, who had just turned 14 last week. "I need to talk to all of you." The early October wind whipped her chestnut hair across her face as she guided her siblings inside, struggling to find words that could possibly explain that their parents would never return. 40 miles away, Preston Nichols drove his cattle across the rocky terrain of his recently acquired ranch. At 30, he had finally saved enough from his years of working for other ranchers to purchase his own spread. The land was good, plenty of water from the mountain streams and enough grazing area for his modest herd to grow. But it was lonely work, especially as winter approached. Preston pulled his hat lower against the setting sun and whistled to his cattle dog, Rusty. "Let's get them home, boy," he said, his deep voice carrying on the wind. Tomorrow he'd ride into Cowboy for supplies, unaware that the trip would change his life forever. Katherine spent the night holding her sobbing siblings, her own grief pushed down deep where it couldn't interfere with what needed to be done. By morning, her eyes were red-rimmed but dry as she prepared a meager breakfast of cornmeal mush. "What happens now, Katie?" Samuel asked, pushing his food around the tin plate. "We keep going," she answered, forcing confidence into her voice. "Pa taught me plenty about the ranch, and I've been helping Ma with the book since I was 15. Emma looked up, her face a younger mirror of Katherine's. "But what about the mortgage? I heard Pa telling Ma they were behind." Katherine's stomach tightened. "The mortgage." With the poor harvest this year and the cattle disease that had claimed half their small herd in the spring, her father had been counting on the supply run to Silverton to bring in enough money to make the payment. Now, with him gone and winter coming. "Don't you worry about that," Katherine said firmly, though worry was exactly what consumed her. "We Daniels have faced worse." But as she stood at the window watching her siblings do their morning chores with slumped shoulders and occasional sobs, Katherine knew they had never faced anything like this. The small stack of coins in her father's strongbox wouldn't last a month, let alone get them through the winter. After breakfast, Katherine hitched their only remaining horse to the wagon. "Samuel, you're in charge until I get back. I'm riding into town to see Mr. Winters at the bank." The ride into Cowboy was normally beautiful, with the San Juan Mountains rising majestically on all sides. But today, Katherine barely noticed the splendor. Her mind raced with calculations and possibilities, none of them promising. Cowboy had grown considerably since the silver mines opened, transforming from a small settlement to a proper town with false-fronted buildings lining the main street. Katherine tied her horse outside the bank, straightened her simple calico dress, and walked in with her head high. Mr. Winters, the banker, was a thin man with spectacles who had always greeted her father with respect. Today, his expression upon seeing her was one of practiced sympathy. "Miss Daniels, I was so sorry to hear about your parents. A terrible tragedy. Thank you, Mr. Winters. I've come about our mortgage. The sympathy in his eyes cooled. Ah, yes. Well, as you may know, your father was 3 months behind already, with the payment due at the end of the month. I need more time, Katherine said, hating the pleading note in her voice but pushing forward anyway. Just until spring. I can manage the ranch and, Miss Daniels, he interrupted. I understand your situation, but the bank cannot extend credit indefinitely. Perhaps you should consider selling the property and moving to town. A young woman alone with 4 children to raise. They're my siblings, not my children, she corrected, bristling. And the ranch is our home. My father built it with his own hands. Nevertheless, the bank requires payment. I can give you until the first snowfall, but after that, I must insist on full payment or we'll have to foreclose. The first snowfall could come any day in the mountains. It wasn't nearly enough time. Thank you for your consideration, Katherine said stiffly, turning to leave before he could see the tears threatening to spill over. Outside the bank, she stood for a moment, taking deep breaths of the crisp mountain air. She needed supplies: flour, coffee, sugar, ammunition for the rifle in case wolves came after their remaining livestock. But the general store would expect payment, and she needed to conserve every penny. As Katherine debated, a commotion down the street caught her attention. A cattle drive was coming through town, raising dust and noise as cowboys herded the animals toward the stockyards. Leading them was a tall man on a chestnut horse, his face partially obscured by a wide-brimmed hat, but his commanding presence unmistakable as he directed his men. Preston guided his cattle through Aure's Main Street, carefully avoiding the wagons and pedestrians who paused to watch the procession. He'd managed to secure a good price for 10 head at the stockyards, enough to purchase the supplies he needed, and still have some left for saving. If he was careful, he could expand his herd come spring. After completing the sale, Preston headed to the general store. He was examining a new axe handle when the bell above the door jingled, and a young woman entered. Despite her simple dress and the worry lines etched around her eyes, she carried herself with dignity. Preston found himself watching as she approached the storekeeper with a small list in hand. "Mr. Thompson," she said, "I was hoping we might continue my father's arrangement for store credit until after the next harvest." The storekeeper's friendly expression faltered. "Miss Daniels, I was mighty sorry to hear about your folks. Real tragedy, but I can't extend any more credit. Your pa's account is already considerable. I understand, but we need supplies to get through the winter. I can work, perhaps help Mrs. Thompson with sewing or—" "Now, Miss Daniels," the storekeeper interrupted, "that's kind of you to offer, but we both know it won't cover what you need. Perhaps it's time to consider other arrangements for you and your siblings. The church might— The Daniels family doesn't need charity," she cut in, her voice steady despite the flush of embarrassment on her cheeks. "We just need a little time." Preston couldn't help but admire her spirit, even as he recognized the desperation beneath it. He had seen that same look on his mother's face after his father died, leaving them with a failing farm and mounting debts. If not for the kindness of neighbors, he and his mother might not have survived. "Excuse me," he said, stepping forward. "I couldn't help overhearing. I'd be happy to cover the ladies' purchases today." Both Katherine and the storekeeper turned to look at him in surprise. "I don't accept charity either, mister," Katherine said, her green eyes flashing with a mixture of pride and desperation. "Nichols. Preston Nichols. And it's not charity, it's an investment. I just bought property about 40 miles southeast of here. Good ranchland, but it needs work. I could use some help clearing fields, mending fences." "Perhaps we could work out a trade." Katherine studied him skeptically. A stranger offering help always came with strings attached. Her father had warned especially when that help was offered to a woman alone. Yet there was something straightforward in his blue eyes that made her hesitate to refuse outright. "What kind of trade?" she asked cautiously. "Supplies for labor." "Your brothers could help me on the weekends if you have brothers. That is, and in exchange, I'll provide what your family needs to get through winter." "I have one brother. He's 10. Preston nodded thoughtfully. "Old enough to learn, and you? What skills do you bring, Miss Daniels?" "Katherine," she said automatically. "I can cook, tend livestock, keep books, and shoot straight enough to bring down a deer at 100 paces." The last part wasn't strictly true. Her longest successful shot had been closer to 70, but she lifted her chin defiantly nonetheless. A smile tugged at the corner of Preston's mouth. "Impressive. I'm particularly in need of good cooking, as mine tends to drive even the coyotes away." Despite herself, Katherine felt a small smile forming. "My family needs more than food, Mr. Nichols. We need a way to keep our ranch." "Then perhaps we can help each other," he said. "Fill your list, Miss Daniels. We can discuss specifics after." Katherine hesitated, pride warring with practicality. Her siblings were waiting, hungry and grieving. They needed food today, regardless of tomorrow's problems. "Very well, Mr. Nichols," she finally agreed. "But understand that any arrangement between us is business only." "I wouldn't have it any other way," he replied with a tip of his hat. An hour later, with the wagon loaded with supplies that would last at least a month, Katherine found herself explaining their situation to Preston over coffee at the small hotel restaurant. She hadn't intended to tell him so much, but something about his steady gaze and thoughtful questions drew the story from her. "So the bank's giving you until first snow, which could be any day now," Preston summarized. "And you need to come up with 3 months back payments plus the current month." "Yes. It's impossible, I know, but I have to try. I can't let my siblings lose their home on top of losing our parents." Preston was quiet for a moment, stirring his coffee. "What if I leased some of your grazing land? I've got more cattle than my current spread can handle through winter. I could pay up front enough to cover your mortgage payments through spring." Katherine stared at him, suspicious. "Why would you do that? You don't know me or my family." "I know what it's like to lose parents and face losing everything else," he said simply. "And good grazing land is hard to find. It's a sound business decision." "And what would you expect in return beyond use of the land?" Katherine asked bluntly. Preston met her gaze directly. "Honesty. Hard work, and maybe a decent meal when I come to check on my cattle." He smiled slightly. "I meant what I said. My cooking is terrible." Katherine couldn't help the small laugh that escaped her. "You haven't tasted mine yet." "I'm willing to risk it," he said, his eyes crinkling at the corners. Something in her chest loosened slightly, the first easing of the crushing weight she'd been carrying since the sheriff's visit. "I need to discuss this with my siblings," she said. "Would you be willing to ride out to our place tomorrow to see the land and meet them?" "I'd be honored," Preston said. "And Miss Daniels, whatever you decide, the supplies are yours. Consider it a neighborly gesture." Katherine wanted to refuse. Pride and caution both demanded it, but the image of her siblings' faces when she returned with full supplies overrode her hesitation. "Thank you, Mr. Nichols. That's very kind." "Preston, please," he said, standing as she rose to leave. "And it's not kindness. It's what neighbors do." Katherine nodded, uncertain whether to trust this unexpected lifeline but desperate enough to grasp it nonetheless. "Until tomorrow, then." Preston. As she drove the wagon home, Katherine tried to make sense of the day's events. Preston Nichols seemed genuine, but she had learned early that appearances could be deceiving. Still, the mortgage would come due regardless of her caution, and his offer might be their only chance. When she arrived home, the children ran out to meet her, their faces brightening at the sight of the loaded wagon. "You got sugar," Mary exclaimed, spotting the package. "Can we make cookies like Ma used to?" "Not today, sweetheart," Katherine said gently. "But soon." "Now, everyone help unload. We've got a visitor coming tomorrow, and I need the place looking its best." "A visitor?" Samuel asked suspiciously. "Who?" "A rancher named Preston Nichols. He's interested in leasing some of our grazing land for his cattle." "Is he nice?" Mary asked, always the first to look for the good in people. Katherine thought of Preston's steady gaze and straightforward manner. "I think so, but we'll decide together after you meet him." That night, after the younger ones were asleep, the twins cornered Katherine in the kitchen. "Is this Preston handsome?" Emma asked with the directness of her 14 years. Katherine felt her cheeks warm. "That's hardly relevant." "So he is," Eliza said with a knowing smile. "Is he very old?" "He's around 30, I'd guess. And this is business, nothing more," Katherine insisted. "We need the money to keep the ranch, that's all." "If you say so," Emma replied, exchanging a look with her twin. "But Ma always said a good man is worth more than gold." "Go to bed," Katherine said, shooing them away. "And don't get any romantic notions. Life isn't a dime novel." But as she banked the fire for the night, Katherine found herself wondering what it might be like to have a partner to share these burdens. Someone steady and kind, with blue eyes that crinkled when he smiled. She shook herself firmly. Such thoughts were foolish and dangerous. Her focus needed to be on survival, not daydreams. Preston arrived the next morning as promised, riding up to the cabin just as Katherine finished hanging the laundry. She watched his approach, noting the easy way he sat his horse and the respectful nod he gave her as he dismounted. "Miss Daniels," he greeted her, removing his hat. "Your land is even more beautiful than I'd imagined." Katherine glanced around at the familiar view. The cabin nestled against the hillside, the creek running clear through the pastures, the mountains rising majestically beyond. She sometimes forgot to see the beauty through the constant work the place required. "Thank you," she said. "Would you like to see the grazing areas first or meet my siblings?" "The children, please," Preston said with a warm smile. "Land is important, but people more so." Katherine led him to the cabin, where the siblings had been instructed to wait. They stood in an awkward line, Samuel trying to look older than his 10 years, the twins attempting to hide their curious glances, and Mary clutching her rag doll with wide eyes. "Mr. Nichols, these are my siblings. Samuel, Emma, Eliza, and Mary." Preston greeted each of them seriously, shaking Samuel's hand and commenting on the twins' matching braids before kneeling to address Mary at her level. "That's a fine doll you have there, Miss Mary. Does she have a name?" "Petunia," Mary answered shyly. "Pa gave her to me for my birthday." "A beautiful name for a beautiful doll," Preston said kindly. "My mother used to make dolls like that. She taught me to whittle and I'd make the furniture for them." Mary's eyes widened. "You can make doll furniture?" "I'm a bit out of practice, but I could try my hand at it again," Preston offered. Katherine watched the interaction with surprise. Most men she knew had little patience for children's concerns, but Preston spoke to Mary with genuine interest. "Perhaps Mr. Nichols would like some coffee before we tour the property," Katherine suggested, feeling a strange flutter in her chest as Preston stood and smiled at her. "That would be wonderful, thank you." Inside, while Katherine prepared coffee, Preston asked Samuel about his responsibilities on the ranch, listening attentively to the boy's proud explanations of feeding the chickens and helping with the horses. "A man carrying his weight," Preston commented approvingly. "Your parents must have been very proud of you all." At the mention of their parents, a shadow fell over the children's faces. Katherine set the coffee cups down with a little more force than necessary, drawing Preston's attention. "I apologize," he said quietly. I didn't mean to bring up painful memories. It's still fresh, Katherine explained, giving her siblings a reassuring smile. But we're managing. After coffee, while the children returned to their chores, Katherine showed Preston around the property. The ranch was modest 60 acres, with about 40 suitable for grazing, but the land was good, with a reliable water source and natural protection from the worst of the mountain storms. This is exactly what I need, Preston said as they stood on a rise overlooking the western pasture. My herd is small now, but I'm planning to expand in the spring. Having secure winter grazing would make all the difference. And the payment? Katherine asked directly. I need enough to cover the mortgage through spring. Preston named a figure that made Katherine's eyes widen. It was more than fair, generous even. That's more than necessary, she said cautiously. It's the going rate, Preston replied. I don't believe in taking advantage of difficult circumstances, Miss Daniels. Their eyes met, and Katherine felt something shift between them, a tentative trust forming. When would you bring the cattle? She asked. Within the week, if we can agree on terms. I'd need to come by regularly to check on them, of course. Of course, Katherine echoed, wondering why the prospect of his regular visits made her pulse quicken slightly. They shook hands on the arrangement, and Preston promised to return the following day with a proper contract and the first payment. As Katherine watched him ride away, Samuel came to stand beside her. I like him, the boy declared. He treats me like I'm not just a kid. He seems decent enough, Katherine agreed cautiously. And he's handsome, Emma added, appearing with her twin. Like those men in the illustrations of King Arthur's knights. Katherine rolled her eyes. He's a rancher, not a knight, and we're making a business arrangement, nothing more. But as she turned back toward the cabin, she couldn't deny the small spark of something beyond gratitude that Preston's arrival had kindled. For the first time since the sheriff's visit, she felt a fragile hope taking root. True to his word, Preston returned the next day with a clearly written contract and enough cash to pay the bank what they owed plus 2 additional months. Katherine read the agreement carefully before signing, pleased to find no hidden clauses or unfair terms. Would you like to come with me to the bank? She asked, carefully folding the money into her reticule. So Mr. Winters can see I have a legitimate business arrangement, if you'd like, Preston agreed, though the money speaks for itself. In my experience, Mr. Winters respects men with property more than women with cash, Katherine said dryly. Preston's expression darkened slightly. Then I'd be honored to accompany you. The trip to town was revelatory. Mr. Winters, who had been dismissive of Katherine's pleas, became accommodating when Preston explained their grazing arrangement. The storekeeper, who had refused credit, now offered to deliver supplies to the Daniels ranch at his earliest convenience. Even the butcher, who had barely acknowledged Katherine's existence before, presented her with a package of bacon on the house. Is it always like this for you? Preston asked as they left the bank, Katherine's receipt safely tucked away. Like what? People treating you as if your words carry less weight because you're a woman. Katherine looked at him in surprise. Few men noticed such things, let alone commented on them. Usually, though it's worse now that I'm alone. When Pa was alive, I was old Daniel's spirited daughter. Now I'm just a woman who doesn't know her place. Their loss, Preston said simply. You strike me as knowing exactly where you belong and what you're capable of. The compliment warmed her more than it should have. Thank you for coming today. It made everything easier. Happy to help, Preston replied. I'll bring the first of my cattle the day after tomorrow if that suits. We'll be ready, Katherine promised. Over the next few weeks, a rhythm developed. Preston brought 30 head of cattle to graze on the Daniels' land, checking on them every few days. Each visit, He brought something extra that he claimed his supplier had thrown in a bolt of cloth: coffee, seeds for spring planting, a wooden toy for Mary. Katherine knew these weren't really extras, but rather Preston's way of helping without injuring their pride. She accepted gracefully, and in return, made sure a hot meal was waiting whenever he visited. November arrived with bitter winds, but no snow yet, a blessing that gave them time to prepare for winter. Preston helped Samuel repair the barn roof one Saturday, showed the twins how to properly seal the cabin's windows against drafts, and spent hours patiently teaching Mary to read from a primer he'd brought, because it was just gathering dust. Katherine watched these interactions with growing warmth. Preston never overstepped, never assumed authority over her siblings, but offered guidance when asked and support when needed. He treated Samuel with the respect a young man craved, the twins with the careful distance appropriate for young ladies while still answering their curious questions, and Mary with a tenderness that sometimes made Katherine's throat tight with emotion. One evening, after Preston had spent the day helping butcher one of their hogs for winter preservation, Katherine invited him to stay for supper. The meal was simple fresh pork roast, potatoes, and applesauce, but the atmosphere around the table was the lightest it had been since their parents' deaths. After the younger ones were abed, Katherine and Preston sat by the fire, drinking coffee. "They're healing," Preston observed quietly. "I see it in their eyes." "Yes," Katherine agreed. "They still have moments of terrible sadness, but they're finding their way forward, thanks in no small part to you." "I've done very little," Preston demurred. "You've done more than you know," Katherine said, surprising herself with the emotion in her voice. "Not just the practical help, though that's been invaluable, but the way you are with them. You make them feel secure, respected." Preston was silent for a moment, watching the flames. "I never had siblings. My mother died when I was 15, so it was just my father and me until I was 18 and he passed too. I always wondered what it would be like to have a family, brothers, sisters." "It's wonderful and terrible all at once," Katherine said with a small smile. "They can drive you to distraction one minute and make your heart so full it hurts the next." "And children of your own, have you thought of that?" Preston asked, then immediately looked embarrassed. "Forgive me, that's too personal a question." "It's all right," Katherine said, though she felt a blush rising. "I used to dream of it, a husband, children of my own. But now, with the responsibility of raising my siblings, it seems unlikely." "Why is that?" Katherine gave him a wry look. "What man would want to take on a wife with 4 ready-made children and a struggling ranch?" Preston met her eyes steadily. "A man who sees the value in both." The air between them seemed to thicken, charged with unspoken possibilities. Katherine looked away first, her heart racing. "It's getting late," she said, rising. "You should start back before it gets too dark." Preston stood, understanding her retreat. "Of course. Thank you for supper, Katherine. It was delicious." It was the first time he'd used her given name, and the sound of it in his deep voice sent a pleasant shiver through her. "You're welcome." "Preston." At the door he paused, hat in hand. "I was wondering if you and the children might join me for Thanksgiving dinner. I know it's still a few weeks away, and it's likely to be a humble affair, but I'd enjoy the company." The invitation touched her deeply. "We'd be honored, though I insist on bringing at least half the meal." Preston smiled, his eyes crinkling in the way that had become familiar and dear to her. "I'd expect nothing less. Good night, Katherine." "Good night, Preston." As she watched him ride away into the gathering darkness, Katherine acknowledged the truth she'd been avoiding for weeks. She was falling in love with Preston Nichols. The realization was both wonderful and terrifying. Love meant vulnerability, and vulnerability was dangerous when you had 4 young lives depending on your strength. Yet as she closed the door against the night chill, she couldn't help but wonder if perhaps strength could be found in partnership as well as independence. The weeks leading to Thanksgiving were busy with winter preparations. The first light snow fell and melted, a warning of the heavy storms to come. Preston's visits continued, sometimes brief checks on his cattle, other times day-long affairs where he helped with repairs or brought supplies from town. Katherine noticed the way her siblings watched for his arrival, how Samuel straightened when Preston asked his opinion, how the twins whispered and giggled when he complimented their cooking, how Mary saved her best stories for his visits. He had become important to all of them, too important, perhaps, given that their arrangement was temporary. 2 days before Thanksgiving, Preston arrived with a wagon laden with firewood. "A contribution to your winter stores," he explained as he and Samuel unloaded it, "and an invitation. The snow's holding off, but the weather could turn by Thanksgiving. I thought you might consider coming to my place today and staying through the holiday." Katherine hesitated. Staying at Preston's ranch would be improper, though, with her siblings as chaperones, not scandalously so. Still, people would talk. "I don't know, Preston. What would people think?" "That a neighboring family is visiting for the holiday," he said simply. "But if you're concerned, Mrs. Abernathy from town is helping me prepare the feast. She'll be staying in my spare room so you and the girls could share the main bedroom, and Samuel and I will take the bunkhouse." His consideration touched her deeply. "You've thought of everything." "I try to," he said with a small smile. "What do you say?" "It would mean a lot to me to share the holiday with people I care about." The hesitation in his voice, the careful way he avoided saying he cared specifically for her, made Katherine wonder if he was fighting the same feelings she was. The thought gave her courage. "We'd love to come," she said. "Give us an hour to pack and secure things here." Preston's smile was worth any risk of gossip. "I'll help." Preston's ranch was smaller than the Daniels place but meticulously maintained. The main house was a sturdy log cabin with a stone chimney, smoke curling invitingly from it as they arrived. A neat bunkhouse stood nearby, along with a well-built barn and corral. Mountains rose behind the buildings, offering protection from the worst of the winter winds. "It's not much," Preston said as he helped Katherine down from the wagon, "but it's mine, free and clear." "It's wonderful," she said sincerely, admiring the careful craftsmanship evident in every structure. Mrs. Abernathy, a plump, cheerful widow from town, greeted them warmly. "Mr. Nichols has been cleaning for days," she confided to Katherine with a wink. "Never seen a man so concerned about dust in the corners." Katherine caught Preston's embarrassed look and felt a surge of affection. He wanted to impress them to impress her. The next 2 days were filled with holiday preparations and laughter. Preston taught Samuel how to whittle, producing a set of toy soldiers that delighted the boy. The twins helped Mrs. Abernathy with the baking, filling the house with the scents of cinnamon and nutmeg. Mary followed Preston everywhere, chattering happily, and he never seemed to tire of her questions. Katherine watched it all with a growing certainty that this warmth, this sense of family was what she wanted for her siblings, what she wanted for herself. Thanksgiving Day dawned clear and cold. They gathered around Preston's table, which had been extended with boards to accommodate everyone. The feast was magnificent: turkey, ham, potatoes, cranberry sauce, fresh bread, and 3 kinds of pie. Before they ate, Preston asked them each to share something they were thankful for. Samuel mentioned the new hunting knife Preston had given him. The twins expressed gratitude for the pretty ribbons Mrs. Abernathy had brought them. Mary simply said, "Family," which brought tears to Katherine's eyes. When Katherine's turn came, she looked around the table, her heart full. I'm thankful for unexpected blessings, she said softly, for kindness that appears when it's most needed. Her eyes met Preston's across the table, and the look that passed between them made Mrs. Abernathy smile knowingly. Preston cleared his throat. I'm thankful for the chance to share my home such as it is. For too many years, I've eaten Thanksgiving dinner alone. Today, it feels like a home, not just a house. After dinner, while the children played outside in the weak winter sunshine and Mrs. Abernathy napped, Preston invited Katherine for a walk. There's something I'd like to show you, he said, offering his arm. He led her to a small rise behind the house, where a single pine tree stood sentinel. From this vantage point, they could see both his property and, in the distance, the outline of the Daniels ranch. I come here to think, Preston said, to plan, to dream. And what do you dream of? Katherine asked, her breath visible in the cold air. Preston turned to face her, his blue eyes serious. Lately, a future that seemed impossible a few months ago. Katherine, I know we haven't known each other long, but I've never been more certain of anything in my life. Katherine's heart began to race as Preston took her gloved hands in his. I love you, he said simply. I love your strength, your devotion to your family, your kindness. I love the way you face each challenge without flinching. I love how your eyes flash when you're determined and how they soften when you watch your siblings. Katherine felt tears gathering, but they were tears of joy, not sorrow. Preston, let me finish, he said gently. I know you have responsibilities, your siblings, your ranch. I would never ask you to choose between those responsibilities and me. Instead, I'm asking if I might share them. If you'll let me, I want to help you raise those children, maintain your land alongside mine, build a life together. He released one of her hands to reach into his pocket, pulling out a small silver ring with a single pearl. It was my mother's, he explained. Katherine Daniels, would you do me the honor of becoming my wife? Katherine looked into his earnest face at the ring glinting in the winter sunlight and knew her answer with absolute certainty. Yes, she whispered, then louder. Yes, Preston, I would be honored to be your wife. His smile was radiant as he slipped the ring onto her finger, then hesitated. May I kiss you? In answer, Katherine stepped closer, lifting her face to his. His kiss was gentle at first, then deepened as she responded, her arms moving around his neck. When they finally parted, they were both breathless. I love you too, she said, realizing she hadn't actually said the words. I've been fighting it, worried about the complications, but it's the truth. I love you, Preston Nichols. His arms tightened around her. We'll figure out the details together. Both our properties, the children's education, everything. We will provide for them, Katherine. I promise you that. I believe you, she said, and she did. For the first time since her parents' death, Katherine felt the burden she carried lighten, shared now with shoulders strong enough to bear it alongside her. They walked back to the house hand in hand, where the news of their engagement was met with cheers from the children and knowing smiles from Mrs. Abernathy. I knew it, Emma exclaimed, from the very first time he visited. Does this mean you'll be our brother now? Samuel asked Preston seriously. Something like that, Preston agreed with a smile, if you'll have me. Mary climbed into his lap without hesitation. Will you teach me to ride a real horse? As soon as spring comes, he promised, looking to Katherine for confirmation. She nodded, her heart so full it seemed impossible to contain. They were married on Christmas Eve in the small church in Auray, decorated with pine boughs and candles. The children stood witness, along with Mrs. Abernathy and a few friends from town. Katherine wore her mother's blue dress, freshly altered by the twins, with Preston's pearl ring on her finger. The minister spoke of commitment, of building a life together, of facing challenges as one. Katherine and Preston exchanged vows with clear voices, their hands clasped tightly together. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," the minister declared. "You may kiss your bride." As Preston's lips met hers, sealing their union, Katherine felt a sense of rightness of coming home. They had known each other mere months, yet she trusted him completely, loved him deeply. After the ceremony, they celebrated with a small feast at their home, the Daniels Ranch, which would now be the Nichols Daniels Ranch, as Preston had insisted both names remain. "A legacy for all the children," he had explained. "Those here now and those that might come later." Katherine had blushed at the implication, but couldn't deny she hoped for children of their own someday. As evening fell, the children helped prepare the cabin for their first night as a unified family. The twins had moved their beds to share the small room previously occupied by Samuel, giving him the loft space he'd long coveted. Mary would continue to share Katherine's room until spring, when Preston planned to expand the cabin. "We'll add proper bedrooms for everyone," he had promised. "And perhaps a sitting room where Katherine can teach the little ones their letters." Now, as they prepared for bed on their wedding night, Katherine felt a mixture of shyness and anticipation. Preston seemed to understand, giving her privacy to change into the nightgown the twins had secretly sewn for her. When she emerged from behind the screen, Preston stood by the fire, having removed his jacket and boots but otherwise still dressed. "You're beautiful," he said softly, his eyes warm. Katherine crossed the room to him, drawn by the love in his gaze. "So are you," she replied, touching his cheek gently. He caught her hand, pressing a kiss to her palm. "We have our whole lives ahead of us," he murmured. "There's no rush for anything tonight." His consideration only made her love him more. "I'm not afraid," she told him. "Not with you." Their first night as husband and wife was tender and passionate, a beginning that promised a lifetime of joy. As they lay together afterward, Katherine's head on Preston's chest, he stroked her hair gently. "Happy?" he asked. "More than I ever thought possible," she answered truthfully. "A few months ago I thought my life was ending. Now I know it was just beginning." Winter passed in a blur of domestic happiness. Preston moved his remaining cattle to the Daniels Nichols Ranch, as it provided better shelter from the heavy snows that came in January. They established routines, Preston and Samuel handling the outdoor work, while Katherine managed the household with the girls' help. In the evenings, they gathered by the fire for reading, storytelling, and plans for the future. Spring brought new life to the ranch. The fields greened, calves were born, and Preston began work on expanding the cabin as promised. Katherine planted a larger garden than ever before, confident now that they would remain on the land for years to come. In late April, as the last snow melted from the mountain passes, Katherine confirmed what she had suspected for weeks. She was expecting their first child. Preston's joy at the news was boundless. He lifted Katherine in his arms, spinning her around before setting her down gently, suddenly concerned. "Is that safe, spinning you around?" Katherine laughed, loving his protective instinct. "I'm not made of glass, Preston. Women have been having babies since the beginning of time. Not my wife." "Not my child," he said seriously. "Promise you'll be careful." "I promise," she said, equally serious. "And you promise not to worry excessively." "That's a promise I'm bound to break," he admitted with a rueful smile. "But I'll try." Telling the children was a joyous affair. The twins immediately began planning baby clothes. Samuel offered to build a cradle, and Mary asked earnestly if the baby would be bigger or smaller than her doll. "Smaller at first," Katherine explained, "but babies grow quickly. Will you love it more than us?" Mary asked, her small face suddenly anxious. Preston knelt beside her. "Mary, when your parents had Emma and Eliza, did they love Samuel less?" Mary shook her head. And when they had you, did they love the older ones less? No, Mary said thoughtfully. That's because love doesn't divide. When shared, it multiplies, Preston explained. Katherine and I will love this baby with all our hearts, just as we love each of you. Mary considered this, then nodded solemnly. I'll help take care of it, she decided. I'm good with my doll. You'll be a wonderful helper, Katherine assured her, exchanging a loving look with Preston over the child's head. The summer of 1882 was the happiest of Katherine's life. The ranch prospered under their combined efforts. The cabin expansion was completed before the August heat made such work unbearable, and her pregnancy progressed without complications. Preston proved to be a devoted husband, tenderly attentive to her changing needs while never treating her as an invalid. In September, with autumn painting the mountains in gold and crimson, their son was born. They named him James, after Katherine's father, with Thomas as a middle name to honor Preston's father. He's perfect, Preston whispered, holding his son for the first time, tears shining in his eyes. Absolutely perfect. The siblings crowded around, eager for their first look at the newest member of their family. Samuel announced that the baby had Preston's chin, definitely, while the twins debated whether his wispy hair would darken to match Katherine's or remain fair like his father's. Mary simply beamed, already prepared with her doll to demonstrate proper baby-holding technique. As Katherine watched her family, both the siblings she had been determined to raise alone, and the husband and son she never expected to have, she felt a sense of completion. The tragedy that had seemed unbearable a year ago had led, through pain and struggle, to this moment of perfect joy. That evening, with baby James sleeping in his cradle and the older children finally persuaded to go to bed, Preston sat beside Katherine on their bed, his arm around her shoulders. I have something for you, he said, pulling a small package from his pocket. Katherine unwrapped it to find a silver locket. Inside was a tiny portrait of Preston on one side and a lock of James's hair on the other. It's beautiful, she said, touching it reverently. A remembrance, Preston explained as he fastened it around her neck, of the day our family became complete. Not complete, Katherine corrected him with a smile, still growing, still becoming. Preston kissed her gently. You're right, as always, we're just beginning. As winter approached again, the anniversary of her parents' deaths brought moments of sadness, but they were tempered by the joy that surrounded Katherine now. She took the children to place flowers on their parents' graves, sharing stories and memories that kept them alive in heart if not in body. They would be so proud of you all, she told her siblings, and they would have loved Preston and little James. You think they know? Mary asked, looking at the sky. That we're happy now, I believe they do, Katherine said, drawing her sister close. I believe they sent Preston to us, in a way. That night, as snow began to fall outside their warm cabin, Katherine nursed James while Preston read aloud to the other children. The scene was so far from the desperate circumstances of a year ago that it seemed almost miraculous. And they lived happily ever after, Preston concluded the story, closing the book. I like that ending, Mary declared, yawning. So do I, Katherine agreed, meeting Preston's eyes across the room. Later, with the children asleep and the baby settled, Katherine and Preston stood at the window, watching the snow transform their world into a wonderland of white. A year ago today, the sheriff brought me news that shattered my world, Katherine said quietly. I thought nothing would ever be right again. Preston drew her close. And now I know that even from the deepest grief, joy can grow, that endings can become beginnings, that when you think you've lost everything, life can surprise you with gifts beyond imagining. Like a family, Preston said, kissing her temple. Like love, Katherine agreed, turning in his arms to face him. Thank you for keeping your promise. What promise? The day we met, when I was desperate and afraid, you said we will provide. And you have not just food and shelter, but love, security, hope. Preston's eyes were tender as he cupped her face in his hands. That's a promise I'll keep renewing every day for the rest of our lives. As they sealed this vow with a kiss, the snow continued to fall outside, covering the land in a blanket of white, a clean page on which their story, already beautiful, would continue to unfold. From tragedy had come triumph, from loss, the greatest gain. Together, they had built not just a home or a ranch, but a future filled with promise for all the children under their care and the generations that would follow. And in the years to come, when travelers passed the prosperous Nichols-Daniels ranch and remarked on the happy family that worked its fields and tended its herds, few would guess that its foundations had been laid in grief, or that its strength had been forged in the courage of a young woman determined to keep her family together against all odds. For Katherine and Preston, that beginning was never forgotten but always treasured, the dark time that had led them to the light, the struggle that had brought them to joy, the separate paths that had joined to create one shared journey of love that would sustain them all their days.